The sound of my neighbor Mrs. Patterson calling my name from across the fence made me look up from the tomato plants I was watering in our backyard garden. Her voice carried an urgency that immediately put me on edge. The kind of tone that signals something is terribly wrong. I set down the watering can and walked toward the chain-link fence that separated our properties. Noting the concerned expression on her weathered face, "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." "Sarah, honey, I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you and Michael moving?" she asked, her pale blue eyes searching my face for answers I didn't have. My stomach dropped like a stone thrown into deep water. "Moving? What do you mean, Mrs. Patterson?" She gestured toward our house, a modest two-story colonial that Michael and I had purchased 5 years ago when we first got married. "Well, there was a real estate agent here this morning taking pictures of your house, and I saw a man in a suit measuring the front yard. I just assumed you were getting ready to sell." The world seemed to tilt sideways around me. A real estate agent taking pictures of our house without my knowledge. "Mrs. Patterson, are you absolutely certain it was our house they were photographing?" "Oh yes, dear. I was watering my flowers right here when they arrived around 9 this morning." The agent was a young woman with blonde hair, very professional looking, and she spent about an hour taking pictures of every angle of your house. The man with her had some kind of measuring device and was walking around your property line. I felt my knees go weak. Michael had left for work at his usual time that morning, kissing me goodbye and reminding me that he had a late meeting with clients and wouldn't be home until after 8. He'd said nothing about real estate agents, nothing about selling our house, nothing that would explain why strangers were photographing our property. "Did you happen to catch the name of the real estate company?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Miss Patterson nodded and pulled a small piece of paper from her cardigan pocket. "I wrote it down because I thought it was strange that you hadn't mentioned anything about selling. The woman's business card blew off your porch and landed in my yard. Her name is Jessica Walsh from Premier Property." Jessica Walsh. The name meant nothing to me, but Premier Properties was one of the larger real estate firms in our area. I took the business card with trembling fingers, staring at the professional headshot of a woman who looked to be in her late 20s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a confident smile. "Mrs. Patterson, I had no idea anyone was coming to look at our house today." Michael never mentioned anything about selling. The elderly woman's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "Oh my, well, perhaps it's a surprise. Maybe Michael is planning to move you somewhere nicer." But even as she said it, I could see in her eyes that she didn't believe it any more than I did. Surprise house sales weren't romantic gestures, they were betrayals. My mind raced through the possible explanations, none of them good. I thanked Miss Patterson and walked back toward our house on unsteady legs, the business card clutched in my sweaty palm. The familiar blue shutters and white siding that had always felt like home now seemed foreign and threatening, as if someone had replaced our house with an identical replica while I wasn't looking. Inside, I sat at our kitchen table and stared at Jessica Walsh's business card, trying to make sense of what Mrs. Patterson had told me. The kitchen where Michael and I had shared countless meals and morning conversations felt different now, charged with an undercurrent of deception that I couldn't quite understand. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number on the business card, my heart hammering against my ribs as it rang once, twice, 3 times. "Premier Properties, this is Jessica Walsh speaking." "Hi, this is Sarah Mitchell. I believe you were at my house this morning taking photographs." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Oh yes, Mrs. Mitchell. I was hoping to hear from you. Your husband Michael asked me to do a preliminary market analysis on your property. He mentioned that you two are looking to downsize and wanted to get an idea of what the house might be worth in today's market." Downsize? Michael had told this woman we wanted to downsize. I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breathing. "I see, and when did Michael contact you about this?" "Let me check my records," Jessica said, and I could hear the sound of papers shuffling. He called me last Tuesday and asked if I could come out this week to take some preliminary photos and measurements. He said you both were eager to get the process started. Last Tuesday, I remembered that day clearly, because it was the day Michael had come home late from work claiming he'd been stuck in traffic. He'd been distracted during dinner, checking his phone constantly, and giving short answers to my questions about his day. Did Michael mention why we were interested in selling? He said you two had found a smaller place that would be more manageable, and that you were excited about the possibility of having some extra money to travel. He seemed very enthusiastic about the whole thing. Extra money to travel. Michael and I hadn't taken a real vacation in 3 years because of our tight budget. The idea that we suddenly had travel money made no sense, unless he was planning to sell our house and keep the proceeds for himself. Jessica, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did Michael give you any timeline for when we wanted to list the house? Well, he did mention that he was hoping to move quickly. He said you two had already put an offer in on another property, and needed to know if your current house would sell fast enough to make the purchase work. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. We had put an offer in on another property, except we hadn't. At least, I had. Thank you for your time, Jessica. I'll talk to Michael and get back to you. I hung up the phone and sat in the profound silence of my kitchen, trying to process what I'd just learned. Michael had contacted a real estate agent about selling our house without telling me. He'd claimed we were downsizing, and had already found another property. He'd arranged for photographs and measurements to be taken while I was home alone, probably hoping I wouldn't notice, or that Mrs. Patterson wouldn't mention it. But why would he want to sell our house without my knowledge? The property was in both our names, so he couldn't complete a sale without my signature. Unless he was planning to forge my signature, or unless he had some other plan that I couldn't yet understand. I walked through our house room by room looking at everything with new eyes. The living room where we'd watched countless movies together, the dining room where we'd hosted dinner parties for our friends, the bedroom where we'd made love and shared our dreams for the future. Had any of it been real, or had Michael been planning to abandon all of it from the beginning? In Michael's home office, I noticed something I'd never paid attention to before. His filing cabinet, which usually sat flush against the wall, had been pulled out slightly, as if someone had been accessing files and hadn't pushed it back into place properly. The drawers that were normally locked were slightly ajar. My hands shook as I opened the top drawer, not sure what I was looking for but knowing I needed to find answers. Inside were folders labeled with various financial documents, insurance papers, and what appeared to be real estate information. At the back of the drawer was a folder I'd never seen before, labeled simply Property Research. Inside the folder were printouts of house listings, all in neighborhoods I didn't recognize. Expensive neighborhoods with houses that cost significantly more than what our current home was worth. There were also handwritten notes in Michael's familiar scrawl, calculations about mortgage payments and down payment amounts that made my stomach turn. One particular listing caught my attention. It was a luxury townhouse in the exclusive Riverside Gardens development, priced at $4. Our current house was worth maybe $280,000 on a good day. But what made my blood run cold was the notation Michael had made in the margin. Perfect for S. Close to her work, gated community. Sue. Who was S? I kept digging through the folder and found something that made my heart stop completely. It was a loan application, filled out in Michael's handwriting, for a mortgage on the Riverside Gardens townhouse. The application listed Michael as the primary borrower, and someone named Stephanie Chen as the co-borrower. Stephanie Chen. The loan application was dated 3 weeks ago, which meant Michael had been planning this for at least that long. But what horrified me most was the section where he'd listed our current house as collateral for the new loan. He was planning to use our home to secure a mortgage for a house he intended to share with another woman. I sank into Michael's desk chair, the loan application trembling in my hands. My husband of 5 years was planning to sell our house and use the money to buy a new home with his girlfriend. The real estate agent, the photographs, the mysterious late nights at work, it was all part of an elaborate plan to financially devastate me while setting himself up for a new life with someone else. My phone buzzed with a text message from Michael. Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. Love you. Love you. The casual cruelty of those words made me want to scream. How long had he been lying to me? How long had he been planning this betrayal while continuing to kiss me goodbye each morning and tell me he loved me each night? I took pictures of every document in the folder with my phone, making sure to capture all of Michael's handwritten notes and calculations. Then I carefully returned everything to its original position and closed the filing cabinet. If Michael was playing a long game, then I needed to be smarter than him, but I also needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. Who was Stephanie Chen? How long had Michael been seeing her, and most importantly, what was his end game? Was he planning to divorce me after the house sale was complete? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Or was he hoping to somehow manipulate me into signing away my rights to our property? I spent the rest of the afternoon researching Stephanie Chen online. A quick Facebook search revealed a woman in her late 20s who worked as a marketing coordinator for a tech company downtown. She was beautiful in a polished, professional way, with long dark hair and the kind of confident smile that suggested she was used to getting what she wanted. Her Facebook profile was mostly private, but the photos I could see showed someone who lived a lifestyle significantly more expensive than what a marketing coordinator's salary would typically support. Designer handbags, restaurant meals at upscale establishments, weekend trips to expensive resorts. Either Stephanie came from money, or someone was funding her lifestyle. I was willing to bet I knew who that someone was, but the most damning evidence was in the public photos from her company's events. In several pictures from office parties and work functions over the past 6 months, I could see Michael in the background. Not prominently featured, but definitely there, always standing close to Stephanie, always looking at her with an expression I recognized from the early days of our relationship. 6 months. Michael had been cheating on me for at least 6 months, and instead of having the decency to ask for a divorce, he'd decided to steal our house and use the proceeds to start a new life with his girlfriend. By the time Michael came home that evening, I had managed to compose myself enough to act normal. I greeted him with a smile and asked about his day, listening to him spin another elaborate lie about difficult clients and late meetings. He was so convincing, so sincere in his deception, that I almost doubted what I'd discovered. Almost. "How was your day, sweetheart?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind as I stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes. "Quiet," I said, leaning back against his chest and hating myself for the way my body still responded to his touch. "I spent most of the day in the garden." "That's nice. The tomatoes are really coming along." Such a normal conversation, such ordinary domestic intimacy. If I hadn't known about Stephanie, about the house sale, about the loan application, I would have cherished this moment as evidence of our happy marriage. "Michael, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever think about us maybe getting a different house someday? Something smaller, maybe?" I felt his body tense slightly behind me, and when he answered, his voice was carefully controlled. "Sometimes." "Why do you ask?" "I don't know. I was just thinking it might be nice to have less maintenance, more freedom to travel." "Yeah, that could be nice," he said, but I could hear the wheels turning in his head. "Have you been looking at houses online?" "A little. Have you?" Another pause. "Not really, but if you're interested, we could start exploring our options." The ease with which he lied was breathtaking. Michael had been planning to sell our house for weeks, possibly months, and he was sitting there pretending the idea had never occurred to him. "That sounds like fun," I said, turning in his arms to look at his face. "We could even talk to a real estate agent, get an idea of what this place might be worth." For just a moment, Michael's expression flickered, a brief flash of panic before his features settled back into their usual calm mask. "Sure, when you're ready to take that step, we can look into it." When I was ready, as if this was my idea, as if he hadn't already contacted Jessica Walsh and arranged for our house to be photographed and measured. That night, I lay awake next to Michael, listening to his steady breathing and planning my next move. He thought he was being clever, manipulating me into a situation where I would unknowingly cooperate with my own financial destruction, but Michael had made one crucial mistake in his planning. He had underestimated me. I had always been the one who handled our finances, who balanced our checkbooks and paid our bills. I knew every detail of our financial situation, including things that Michael had apparently forgotten or chosen to ignore, like the fact that my grandmother had left me a substantial inheritance when she died 2 years ago, money that I had invested wisely and never mentioned to Michael because I wanted to surprise him with a dream vacation for our 10th anniversary. That inheritance, which had grown to nearly $200,000 with careful investment, was sitting in an account that only I could access. It was enough to buy a house outright, enough to start over completely if I needed to, but more importantly, it was enough to beat Michael at his own game. If he wanted to sell our house to buy a new home with his girlfriend, then I would let him, but I would make sure that when the dust settled, I was the one who came out ahead. The next morning, I called Jessica Walsh back. Jessica, this is Sarah Mitchell again. I've talked to Michael, and we'd like to move forward with listing our house. That's wonderful. I'm so glad you're both excited about this opportunity. Actually, I have a question about the process. Michael mentioned that we might want to look at other properties while our house is on the market. I was wondering if you could help us with that as well. Absolutely. I'd be happy to help you find your next home. Do you have any specific neighborhoods in mind? Well, Michael has been talking about the Riverside Gardens development. Do you have any listings there? There was a pause, and when Jessica spoke again, her voice was slightly different. Riverside Gardens is a lovely area, very upscale. Are you looking for something specific there? Just exploring our options. I know it's probably out of our price range, but Michael seems really interested in that neighborhood. I see. Well, I do have one listing there that might interest you. It's a beautiful townhouse, recently updated, perfect for a couple looking to downsize. The same townhouse from Michael's loan application, the one he was planning to buy with Stephanie. That sounds perfect. Could we schedule a viewing? Of course. When would work for you and Michael? Actually, I'd like to see it myself first, if that's okay. I want to surprise Michael with how serious I am about this move. Jessica agreed to meet me at the Riverside Gardens townhouse the following afternoon. After hanging up, I spent the morning researching everything I could about the property, the neighborhood, and the sale process. The townhouse was exactly what I'd expected from the photos: beautiful, modern, and completely out of reach for a couple with our supposed income, but it wasn't out of reach for someone with access to a $200,000 inheritance. This is a beautiful property, Jessica said, as she led me through the spacious rooms. The current owner is motivated to sell quickly, so there might be room for negotiation on the price. It's lovely, I agreed, taking pictures with my phone. How quickly could someone close on a property like this, with the right financing? Probably within 30 days. Are you and Michael planning to sell your current house first, or would you be looking to buy this one before your house sells? We're still working out the details of our financing, I said carefully, but I'm definitely interested. What would I need to do to put in an offer? Jessica walked me through the offer process, explaining earnest money deposits, inspection contingencies, and closing procedure. I listened carefully, taking mental notes about every step of the process that Michael would need to complete. When we finished the tour, I asked Jessica the question I'd been building up to. One more thing. I know this might sound strange, but has anyone else been looking at this property recently? Michael mentioned that he might have heard about it from someone at work. Jessica's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Well, there has been some interest from other buyers. In fact, there might be another offer coming in soon. Really? Anyone we might know? I can't really discuss other clients, but I will say that if you're serious about this property, you might want to move quickly. Another offer coming in soon, from someone Jessica couldn't discuss. Someone like Michael and Stephanie Chen. I thanked Jessica for her time, and drove home with a clear picture of Michael's plan. He was working with the same real estate agent to sell our house and buy the townhouse. He probably thought he was being clever, using one agent for both transactions to streamline the process, but what he'd actually done was give me access to information about both sides of his scheme. That evening, Michael came home earlier than usual, which immediately put me on alert. He seemed nervous, fidgety in a way that was unusual for him. How was your day? I asked, watching his face carefully. Good, actually. I've been thinking about what we talked about yesterday, about maybe looking for a different house. Oh really? Yeah, and I thought maybe we should talk to a real estate agent sooner rather than later, get a better idea of what our options are. Michael was accelerating his timeline. Something had happened to make him feel like he needed to move faster. That sounds like a great idea. Do you know any good agents? Actually, I got a recommendation from someone at work, a woman named Jessica Walsh from Premier Properties. I was thinking maybe I could give her a call. The audacity was breathtaking. Michael was suggesting we hire the same agent he'd already been working with for weeks, pretending it was a fresh recommendation from a colleague. Sure, that sounds perfect, I said. Should we call her together? I was thinking I could reach out to her first, just to get some basic information. Then we could meet with her together once I know more about the process. Of course he wanted to call her first. He needed to coordinate their stories, make sure Jessica understood that she was supposed to pretend this was the first time she'd heard from either of us. Okay, that makes sense. Let me know what she says. Over the next few days, Michael put on an elaborate show of researching our options. He left real estate websites open on his laptop, where I would see them. He mentioned conversations with Jessica Walsh about market conditions and pricing strategies. He even brought home information packets about different neighborhoods, including one for Riverside Gardens. This area looks interesting, he said, showing me the same brochure I'd already seen in his filing cabinet. It's a little more expensive than what we're used to, but the agent thinks we could afford it if we get a good price for our current house. It does look nice, I agreed. Very upscale. Maybe we should drive through the neighborhood this weekend, get a feel for the area. Michael was laying the groundwork for what he probably thought would be a gradual seduction. He would slowly convince me that selling our house was my idea, that moving to Riverside Gardens was our shared dream. By the time I realized what was happening, the paperwork would already be signed and the money would already be transferred. But Michael had made several crucial miscalculations. First, he had assumed I was too trusting to investigate his claims, or too financially naive to understand the implications of what he was proposing. Second, he had assumed I didn't have independent financial resources that would allow me to outmaneuver him. And third, he had assumed I would react to discovering his affair with Stephanie the way he expected a betrayed wife to react, with tears, accusations, and emotional breakdown that would give him the moral high ground to justify his action. Instead, I was going to react like the intelligent, resourceful woman I'd always been, the woman Michael had apparently forgotten he'd married. I spent my lunch breaks over the next week visiting other real estate agents, not to sell our house, but to buy Michael's mother's house. Michael's mother, Patricia, was 73 years old and had been talking for the past 2 years about selling her large family home and moving into a retirement community. She lived alone in the 4-bedroom house where Michael had grown up, about 20 minutes from our neighborhood. It was a beautiful property on 2 acres of land, worth easily $350,000, but Patricia had been reluctant to list it because she was overwhelmed by the process and emotionally attached to the home where she'd raised her children. Michael had been encouraging his mother to sell for months, ostensibly because he was worried about her managing such a large property by herself. But I was beginning to suspect he had other motivations. If Patricia sold her house, she would likely downsize to a smaller place and would have a substantial amount of money left over. Money that, as her only child, Michael would eventually inherit. But what if someone else bought Patricia's house first? I called Patricia directly and asked if we could meet for coffee. She was delighted to hear from me, as always. Patricia had been nothing but kind to me since Michael and I got married, treating me like the daughter she'd never had. Sarah, sweetheart, it's so good to hear from you. How are you and Michael doing? We're doing well, Patricia. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something. Michael mentioned that you've been thinking about selling your house. Oh yes, I have. It's just gotten to be too much for me to maintain, but the whole process seems so complicated, and I have so many memories in this house. I can imagine how difficult that must be. Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I have a proposition that might solve both of our problems. I met Patricia at her favorite cafe downtown and presented her with an offer I'd been developing all week. Patricia, what if I bought your house directly from you? No real estate agents, no strangers tramping through your home, No complicated negotiation, just a straightforward sale between family members. Patricia's eyes widened. Oh, Sarah, that's such a sweet offer, but I couldn't ask you and Michael to take on such a big purchase. Actually, this would be something I'm doing independently. I inherited some money from my grandmother, and I've been looking for a good investment property. Your house would be perfect. I explained that I would pay her the full market value for the house, but she could continue living there as long as she wanted, paying me a modest rent that would help cover the property taxes and maintenance. When she was ready to move to a retirement community, we could work out whatever arrangement made her most comfortable. But Sarah, does Michael know about this plan? Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first, see if you were interested. If you are, then I'll discuss it with Michael. Patricia was clearly intrigued by the offer, but she was also confused about why I would want to buy her house without involving Michael in the decision. Sweetheart, is everything okay between you and Michael? This seems like a big decision to make without discussing it with your husband. I had prepared for this question. Everything's fine, Patricia. I just want to surprise Michael with how serious I am about building our financial future together. He's always talking about investment opportunities, and I thought this would show him that I'm ready to think bigger about our money. It wasn't entirely a lie. I was thinking bigger about our money, just not in the way Patricia assumed. We agreed that Patricia would think about my offer over the weekend and let me know her decision on Monday. I also asked her not to mention our conversation to Michael until we had worked out all the details. I want to surprise him, I said. You know how he loves surprises. Patricia smiled and patted my hand. You're such a thoughtful wife, Sarah. Michael is lucky to have you. If only she knew how thoughtful I was really being. On Monday morning, Patricia called to accept my offer. We agreed on a purchase price of $340,000, which was slightly below market value but fair given that we were avoiding real estate commissions and closing costs. I arranged for a property inspection and contacted a real estate attorney to handle the paperwork. The entire transaction could be completed within 3 weeks, well before Michael would be ready to execute his plan to sell our house, but I wasn't finished. If Michael wanted to play games with real estate transactions, then I was going to make sure I won. I also contacted the bank that held our mortgage and arranged to pay off our current house completely. The inheritance money I'd been saving for our 10th anniversary vacation would instead become my insurance policy against Michael's betrayal. By the time Michael discovered what I'd done, I would own 2 houses outright, our current home and his mother's family property. He would own nothing except his share of whatever equity we'd built up in our house over the past 5 years. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange kind of performance, with both Michael and me pretending to be planning a future together, while actually preparing for war. Michael continued his elaborate charade of house hunting, bringing home more brochures and scheduling what he claimed were preliminary meetings with Jessica Walsh. I continued to play the role of the supportive wife, expressing enthusiasm for our downsizing plans, while secretly finalizing the purchase of his mother's house. The cognitive dissonance was exhausting. Every evening, Michael would kiss me hello and ask about my day, and I would smile and tell him about work meetings and grocery shopping, while mentally reviewing the legal documents I'd been signing. We would sit together on the couch watching television, his arm around my shoulders, while I calculated property values and transfer taxes in my head. The hardest part was maintaining physical intimacy with someone I now knew was planning to destroy my life. Michael still reached for me in bed, still initiated sex with the same gentle persistence that had always characterized our relationship. My body responded to his touch out of habit and history, but my mind was elsewhere, planning and calculating and preparing for the confrontation that was coming. On Thursday evening of the second week, Michael announced that he'd scheduled a meeting with Jessica Walsh for the following Monday. She wants to come look at our house, give us a professional assessment of what we could expect to get for it, he said. I told her we were ready to move forward with listing it. That's exciting, I said. Are you nervous? A little. It's a big step. Michael had no idea how big a step it was going to be. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that usually made me feel optimistic about the day ahead. Instead, I felt like I was walking through a minefield, Every conversation with Michael weighted with the knowledge of what he was planning. The closing on Patricia's house was scheduled for the following Wednesday, just 2 days after Michael's meeting with Jessica Walsh about listing our home. The timing was crucial. I needed to own Patricia's house before Michael discovered what I was doing, but I also needed to understand the full scope of his deception before I made my final move. As I sipped my morning coffee and watched Michael get ready for work, I realized there were still too many questions I didn't have answers to. How long had he been planning this betrayal? Was Stephanie actively involved in the scheme, or was she simply the beneficiary of Michael's treachery? Most importantly, what was his endgame? Did he plan to divorce me after the house sale, or was he hoping to somehow manipulate me into signing away my rights while remaining married? Michael came into the kitchen wearing his best suit, the charcoal gray one he usually reserved for important client meetings. He looked handsome and successful, every inch the trustworthy husband and business. The fact that this polished exterior concealed such calculated cruelty made my stomach turn. "You look nice," I said, forcing myself to smile. "Big day at work?" "Just want to make a good impression on some potential investors," he replied, adjusting his tie. "We're pitching a new development project, and there's a lot of money on the line." Another lie, delivered with the same casual confidence he'd been using for months. I was beginning to understand that Michael wasn't just betraying me, he was betraying reality itself, living in a fantasy world where his actions had no consequences and his lies would never be discovered. "That sounds important. I hope it goes well." "Thanks, sweetheart. I might be late again tonight, depending on how the presentation goes." Late again tonight, probably another evening with Stephanie, planning their future together while I sat at home like a fool, waiting for a husband who was already gone. After Michael left, I called in sick to work and drove to the law office where I was scheduled to review the final paperwork for Patricia's house purchase. My attorney, Rebecca Chen, was a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in real estate transactions. I'd chosen her specifically because she wasn't someone Michael knew, and because her reputation for thoroughness was exactly what I needed. "Sarah, I've reviewed all the documents, and everything looks straightforward," Rebecca said as we sat in her conference room. "Patricia's title is clear, the property inspection came back clean, and your financing is already approved. We should be able to close on schedule." "That's wonderful, Rebecca. I need to ask you something confidential. If my husband were to challenge this purchase somehow, what kind of legal standing would he have?" Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Well, since you're using inheritance money that was never commingled with marital assets, and since this is being purchased in your name alone, Michael would have very little recourse. Arizona is a community property state, but inherited assets that remain separate are generally protected. What if he claimed I was making the purchase without his knowledge? That would be his problem, not yours. You're not required to get your spouse's permission to make investments with your separate property. Is there something I should know about your marital situation?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Let's just say that Michael and I have different ideas about our financial future, and I want to make sure my interests are protected." Rebecca nodded knowingly. "I understand. Many spouses discover they need to protect themselves financially. The good news is that this purchase puts you in a very strong position. You'll own a valuable asset outright, and you'll have the rental income from Patricia to help cover expenses." The rental income was something I'd been thinking about carefully. Patricia would pay me $1,200 per month, which was enough to cover the property taxes, insurance, and maintenance on her house. It also meant that I would have a steady income stream that Michael couldn't access or control. "There's one more thing," I said. "I want to make sure that if anything happens to my marriage, this property can't be claimed as a marital asset. Given the source of your funds and the fact that you're purchasing it in your name alone, that shouldn't be an issue. But if you're concerned, we could set up a trust or LLC to hold the property. That would provide an additional layer of protection." A trust. The idea appealed to me immediately. "How would that work?" Rebecca explained that we could create a trust with me as the sole beneficiary and trust. The trust would purchase Patricia's house, and I would manage the property on behalf of the trust. If Michael ever tried to claim the house as marital property, he would have to prove that marital funds were used to purchase it, which he couldn't do. "Let's do that," I said. "How quickly can you set it up?" I can have the trust documents ready by Monday. We'll just need to adjust the purchase agreement to reflect that the trust is the buyer rather than you personally. By the time I left Rebecca's office, I felt like I was finally thinking 3 steps ahead of Michael instead of constantly reacting to his mood. The trust would protect Patricia's house from any future claims, and the rental income would give me financial independence, regardless of what happened to our marriage. But I still needed to understand more about Michael's relationship with Stephanie and his specific plans for our house. That afternoon, I made a decision that felt both necessary and deeply uncomfortable. I was going to follow my husband. Michael's office was located in a glass high-rise downtown, part of a development firm that specialized in commercial real estate projects. I'd visited him there countless times over the years, bringing him forgotten lunches or meeting him for dinner dates. The building's parking garage had multiple levels and several different entrances, making it relatively easy to watch for Michael's car without being seen. I positioned myself across the street in a coffee shop with a clear view of the garage entrance, and settled in to wait. At 4:30 I saw Michael's silver BMW emerge from the garage and turn toward the residential part of town. I followed at a safe distance, my heart pounding with the surreal knowledge that I was spying on my own husband. Michael drove to a trendy apartment complex about 15 minutes from his office, the kind of place that catered to young professionals with modern amenities and high rent. He parked in a visitor's spot and walked confidently toward one of the buildings, clearly familiar with the layout. I watched from my car as he was buzzed into the building, then waited to see if I could figure out which apartment he was visiting. About 10 minutes later I saw a light come on in a third-floor window, and shortly after that, I could see 2 silhouettes moving around inside. One was clearly Michael, tall and broad-shouldered. The other was smaller, more delicate, with long hair that caught the light as she moved. Stephanie Chen. Michael was visiting his girlfriend in her apartment while I sat at home believing he was working late. I sat in my car for over an hour, watching the lit window, and trying to process the reality of what I was seeing. This wasn't just an affair, it was a complete double life. Michael had another home, another routine, another woman who probably believed she was the center of his world just as I had believed for 5 years. The most disturbing part was how normal it all looked. Michael's car parked casually in the visitor's spot, as if he belonged there. The domestic scene playing out in the apartment window, 2 people sharing dinner and conversation like any other couple. If I didn't know better, I would have assumed I was watching strangers living their ordinary lives. At 7:45 the apartment light went off, and a few minutes later Michael emerged from the building. But instead of heading home, he drove to an upscale restaurant downtown. I followed him to the parking lot and watched as he went inside to meet someone. Through the restaurant's large windows I could see Michael sitting at a corner table with a man I didn't recognize. They were dressed casually but expensively, and their body language suggested this was a business meeting rather than a social dinner. Michael had a folder with him, and I watched him spread documents across the table while the other man examined them carefully. The meeting lasted about 45 minutes, ending with what appeared to be a handshake and an exchange of business cards. Michael looked pleased as he collected his documents and prepared to leave. Whatever they had discussed, it had clearly gone well. I managed to get back to my car before Michael came out of the restaurant, and I followed him home from a safe distance. He arrived at our house at 9:20, which meant he would probably tell me he'd been stuck at the office until after 9. Sure enough, when Michael came through the front door, he looked appropriately tired and stressed. "Sorry I'm so late, honey. The investor meeting ran way longer than expected, and then I had to grab dinner with one of the partners to debrief." "That's okay. How did the presentation go?" "Really well, actually. I think we might have secured the funding we need for the new project." I nodded and smiled, marveling at how effortlessly he wove truth into his lies. There probably was a new project that needed funding, and there probably had been some kind of investor meeting. But I now knew that Michael had also spent 2 hours at his girlfriend's apartment before his business dinner. "I'm glad it went well. You must be exhausted." "I am. I think I'm going to shower and go straight to bed." As Michael headed upstairs, I remained in the living room, staring at the television without really seeing it. The man I'd been married to for 5 years was a stranger. The life we'd built together was a fiction. The future I'd been planning was based on lies so fundamental that I wondered if I'd ever really known Michael at all. But the surveillance had given me more than just confirmation of his betrayal. It had given me a crucial piece of information about his business activity. The meeting at the restaurant had clearly been important, and the folder he'd brought suggested he was working on something significant. If Michael was planning to leave me for Stephanie, he might also be positioning himself to take on more lucrative business opportunities that would support their new lifestyle. The next morning I called in sick to work again and spent the day conducting my own research into Michael's business dealings. His development firm, Morrison & Associates, had been involved in several major projects over the past few years, but I'd never paid much attention to the detail. Now I needed to understand exactly how much money Michael had access to and what his financial prospects looked like. Public records showed that Morrison & Associates had recently acquired several large parcels of land on the outskirts of Phoenix, apparently for a new mixed-use development. The project was valued at over $50 million, and Michael was listed as one of the primary project managers. If the development was successful, his commission and bonus payments could be substantial enough to afford a $450,000 townhouse and a lifestyle that would impress a woman like Stephanie Chen. I also discovered that Michael had recently formed a limited liability company called Southwest Investment Holding. The LLC was registered in his name alone, with no mention of me as a member or partner. The company's stated purpose was real estate investment and development, but there were no details about its specific activities or assets. The existence of the LLC was deeply troubling. If Michael was moving money through a company I knew nothing about, he could be hiding assets that should legally be considered marital property. The LLC could also be his way of protecting his earnings from the Morrison & Associates project in case our marriage fell apart. By Monday afternoon I felt like I was drowning in information and speculation. Every new piece of the puzzle I uncovered revealed 3 more questions I couldn't answer. I needed help from someone with expertise in financial investigations, someone who could help me understand the full scope of what Michael was doing. I found Detective Ray Martinez through an online search for private investigators specializing in financial misconduct. His website described him as a former police detective with 15 years of experience investigating white-collar crime. More importantly, he offered initial consultations for people who suspected their spouses of financial impropriety. Miss Mitchell, what you're describing sounds like a classic case of financial infidelity, Detective Martinez said when I met with him that afternoon. Your husband appears to be systematically hiding assets and planning a major financial transaction without your knowledge. Financial infidelity. I'd never heard the term before, but it perfectly described what Michael was doing. He wasn't just cheating on me emotionally and physically, he was cheating on me financially, stealing my future and my security while pretending to be a loving husband. What kind of evidence would I need to prove that he's hiding money? Bank records, business documents, tax returns, anything that shows money flowing in or out of accounts you don't know about. The LLC you mentioned is particularly interesting. If he's using that company to hide income or assets, that could be considered fraudulent conversion of marital property. Detective Martinez explained that Arizona's community property laws meant that any income Michael earned during our marriage belonged equally to both of us, regardless of whose name was on the account. If he was funneling money through the LLC to keep it away from me, that was theft, plain and simple. I can conduct a comprehensive financial investigation, he said. Bank records, business filings, property records, credit reports, the work. It usually takes about a week to get a complete picture of someone's finances. How much would that cost? For a case like this, probably around. I know that sounds like a lot, but if your husband is hiding significant assets, the investigation could save you tens of thousands of dollars in a divorce settlement. $3,000 was a significant expense, but I could afford it with my inheritance money. More importantly, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with before I made my next move. Let's do it. I signed a contract with Detective Martinez and provided him with all the information I had about Michael's business activities, bank accounts, and the mysterious LL. He assured me that he would be discreet and that Michael would never know he was being investigated. Tuesday morning brought the meeting I'd been dreading, anticipating in equal measure.
Jessica Walsh was coming to our house to conduct her initial assessment for the sale. Michael had taken the morning off work to be present for the meeting, and he'd spent the previous evening cleaning and organizing as if this was a genuine surprise rather than something he'd been planning for weeks. "I'm nervous," he told me over breakfast. "What if she thinks our house isn't worth as much as we hoped?" "I'm sure it will be fine," I replied. "The market has been good lately." Michael's performance was flawless. When Jessica arrived, he greeted her like a stranger, thanking her for taking the time to meet with us and explaining our desire to downsize. Jessica played her part equally well, acting as if she'd never seen our house before, and asking questions about our renovation history and neighborhood amenities.
I watched the charade unfold with a mixture of fascination and disgust. These two people had been collaborating for weeks, maybe months, and now they were putting on an elaborate show for my benefit. Jessica photographed every room as if seeing it for the first time, while Michael pointed out features he was particularly proud of. "This is a beautiful property," Jessica said as we concluded the tour. "Based on recent sales in your neighborhood, I think you could expect to list for somewhere in the $290,000 to $310,000 range." "That's higher than we expected," Michael said, and his surprise sounded genuine even though I knew it wasn't. "The market has been strong, and your house has some really desirable features. The updated kitchen and bathrooms, the mature landscaping, the corner lot location, all of those things add value." As Jessica packed up her materials, she handed Michael a folder of information about the selling process. "I've included some comparable sales data and a timeline for how quickly we could get your house on the market if you decide to move forward." "Thank you so much," Michael said. "Sarah and I will review everything and get back to you." After Jessica left, Michael spread her materials across our dining room table with the enthusiasm of someone discovering treasure. "This is amazing, Sarah. If we can get $300,000 for our house, we'll have enough for a substantial down payment on something really nice. Something really nice, like the $450,000 townhouse in Riverside Gardens that he was planning to buy with Stephanie Chen." "It does seem like good news," I agreed. "How quickly do you think we should move on this?" "Well," Jessica said, "the market is hot right now, so probably sooner rather than later. Maybe we should start looking at other properties this weekend. Get a better idea of what's available in our price range." "Our price range?" Michael was still pretending that we were doing this together, that Stephanie didn't exist, that the LLC and the secret business meetings and the evenings at her apartment were all figments of my imagination. "That sounds like a good plan." That afternoon, while Michael was at work, I called Detective Martinez for an update on his investigation. "I've made significant progress," he said. "Your husband has been very busy with his finances lately. The LLC you mentioned, Southwest Investment Holdings, has been much more active than the public records suggest." "What do you mean?" "The company has received several large deposits over the past 6 months, totaling over the money appears to be coming from Michael's work with Morrison and Associates, but it's being funneled through the LLC instead of being reported as personal income." The number hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been carefully budgeting our household expenses and worrying about whether we could afford a vacation, Michael had been hiding a fortune. "Is that legal?" "Probably not. If that money represents commissions or bonuses from his work at Morrison and Associates, it should be reported as personal income on your joint tax returns. By funneling it through the LLC, he's not only hiding it from you, he's probably committing tax fraud." Detective Martinez had more disturbing news. Michael had opened several bank accounts that I knew nothing about, including a savings account with over $150,000 and a checking account that showed regular payments to Stephanie Chen. "How much has he been giving her?" "About $3,000 per month for the past 4 months. The payments are listed as consulting fees, but given what you've told me about their relationship, I think we can assume they're personal support payments." Michael had been giving his girlfriend more money than our entire household budget, using funds that legally belonged to both of us. "There's something else," Detective Martinez continued. "I found records showing that Michael has been shopping for engagement rings." The words hit me like ice water.
"Engagement rings?"
He visited 3 different jewelry stores in the past month and put a $15,000 ring on layaway at Cartwright Jewelers. The ring is being held under Stephanie Chen's name. Michael was planning to propose to Stephanie while still married to me, while living in our house and sharing our bed. He was preparing to ask another woman to marry him.
Mrs. Mitchell.
Are you still there? I'm here. I just need a moment to process this. The revelation about the engagement ring crystallized something that had been building in my mind for days. This wasn't just financial infidelity, or even a conventional affair. Michael was systematically dismantling our marriage while building a new life with someone else. The house sale, the hidden money, the secret LLC, the engagement ring. It was all part of a comprehensive plan to transition from one life to another without missing a beat. Detective Martinez, how quickly can you compile all of this information into a report? I can have everything ready by tomorrow afternoon. Are you planning to confront your husband? Something like that. That evening, Michael came home with flowers and a bottle of wine, claiming he wanted to celebrate Jessica's positive assessment of our house value. We sat at our dining room table, eating takeout Chinese food and pretending to plan our fictional future together, while I calculated exactly how I was going to destroy his real plans. I've been thinking about what Jessica said. Michael told me as he refilled my wine glass about moving quickly while the market is hot. What would you think about listing our house next week?
Next week?
Michael was accelerating his timeline even more. Something was pushing him to move faster, and I suspected it had to do with the engagement ring he'd put on layaway. That seems fast. Are you sure we're ready? I think so. We've been talking about this for weeks now, and all the research shows that spring is the best time to sell. If we wait much longer, we might miss our window. Michael's urgency was revealing. He wasn't just planning to sell our house and buy a new one with Stephanie. He was planning to propose to her, probably as soon as our house sale was finalized and he had access to the proceeds. The timeline was becoming clear. Sell our house, use the money to buy the Riverside Gardens townhouse, propose to Stephanie in their new home, then present me with divorce papers and a fait accompli. By the time I understood what had happened, Michael would already be engaged to someone else and living in a house I'd helped pay for. But Michael had made one crucial error in his plan. He had assumed that I would react to discovering his betrayal the way he expected a naive, financially dependent wife to react, with shock, tears, and helpless acceptance of whatever settlement he offered. Instead, I was going to react like the intelligent, resourceful woman I'd always been, armed with information he didn't know I had, and resources he'd forgotten I possessed. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made everything seem possible. In 3 hours, I would become the owner of Michael's childhood home, a $340,000 property that he knew nothing about. By evening, I would have Detective Martinez's complete financial report, documenting every hidden account and fraudulent transaction Michael had made over the past year. But first I had a phone call to make. I waited until Michael left for work, then dialed Patricia's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright with the excitement of someone anticipating a major life change. "Sarah, sweetheart. Today's the big day. I can hardly believe I'm finally selling this old house." "I'm excited too, Patricia. Actually, I wanted to ask you about something. Has Michael mentioned anything to you recently about his plans for the future?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What kind of plans, dear? Anything about his work, or maybe changes he's thinking about making?" "Well, he did call me last week to ask about my retirement planning. He seemed very interested in what I was going to do with the money from the house sale." Of course he had. Michael was probably calculating his eventual inheritance and factoring it into his financial plans with Stephanie. "Did he seem surprised that you were selling to me instead of listing with a real estate agent?" Another pause, longer this time. "Actually, Sarah, I haven't told Michael about our arrangement yet. I wanted to surprise him at Sunday dinner this weekend. I thought he'd be so pleased that we're keeping the house in the family." My blood turned to ice. Patricia was planning to surprise Michael with news of the sale. That meant he had no idea what I'd done, no opportunity to prepare or react. When he found out that I'd bought his mother's house without his knowledge, using money he didn't know I had, his carefully constructed plans would completely fall apart. "Patricia, I think that's a wonderful idea." Michael loves surprises. The closing on Patricia's house went smoothly, with all the efficiency that comes from a transaction between motivated parties who trust each other. By 2:00 p.m., I was the legal owner of a $340,000 property that Michael had been counting on inheriting someday. The deed was recorded in the name of the Sarah Mitchell Trust, making it impossible for Michael to claim any marital interest in the property. Patricia was emotional during the signing, tears in her eyes as she handed over the keys to the house where she'd raised her son. But she was also relieved to have the uncertainty behind her, and excited about the financial security the sale would provide. "I can't thank you enough for making this so easy," she told me as we left the attorney's office. "Michael is going to be so surprised when I tell him." "I'm sure he will be." That afternoon, I received Detective Martinez's comprehensive report on Michael's hidden finances. The full scope of his deception was even worse than I'd imagined. Over the past year, he had diverted over $300,000 in income through his LLC, opened 8 different bank accounts I knew nothing about, and made cash withdrawals totaling nearly. The report also included copies of Michael's recent credit reports, which showed that he'd applied for a mortgage on the Riverside Gardens townhouse, using inflated income figures, and had listed our current house as collateral without my knowledge. The mortgage application listed Stephanie Chen as a co-borrower, confirming that they were planning to buy the house together. Most damaging of all, Detective Martinez had obtained records showing that Michael had forged my signature on several financial documents, including a home equity loan application that would have allowed him to borrow against our house without my actual consent. Forgery, tax fraud, fraudulent conversion of marital assets. Michael wasn't just cheating on me, he was committing multiple felonies in the process. Armed with this information, I spent Wednesday evening preparing for the conversation that would change everything. I made copies of every document, organized them chronologically, and prepared a timeline of Michael's deceptions. I also called Rebecca Chen and asked her to draft divorce papers that would protect my interests and demand full disclosure of all of Michael's hidden assets. Michael came home that evening in an unusually good mood, whistling as he hung up his coat and announcing that he'd had a breakthrough day at work. "The Morrison project got final approval from the City Planning Commission," he said, kissing my cheek. "We should be able to break ground within 6 months. More money for the LLC, more funds for his new life with Stephanie. That's wonderful, honey. You must be excited." "I am. This project is going to set us up really well financially. We might be able to afford an even nicer house than we originally thought." Michael was still using the language of partnership while actively dismantling our marriage. "Speaking of houses, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about listing our house next week." "Oh yeah? What do you think?" "I think we should do it. I'm ready for a change." Michael's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Really, you're not just saying that to make me happy? Really? In fact, I think we should call Jessica tomorrow and tell her we want to move forward." "That's fantastic, Sarah. I think this is going to be the best decision we've ever made. The best decision we'd ever made. If only Michael knew how right he was, just not in the way he thought." Thursday morning brought a phone call that I'd been expecting but dreading. It was Patricia, calling to tell me about her conversation with Michael. "Sarah dear, I'm afraid there's been some confusion. I told Michael about selling the house to you, and he seems very upset. He said there must be some kind of mistake, that you two hadn't discussed any real estate investments." "What exactly did he say?" "He was quite agitated. He asked me how you could afford to buy my house, and when I mentioned your grandmother's inheritance, he became even more upset. He said he didn't know anything about any inheritance." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The moment of truth had arrived earlier than I'd expected. "Patricia, did Michael say anything else?" "He asked me not to complete the sale until he could talk to you about it. He seemed to think there had been some kind of miscommunication." I understand his confusion, but Patricia, the sale is already complete. I own your house now, and you can continue living there just as we discussed. "But Sarah, Michael is my son. If he's concerned about this arrangement—" "Patricia, I need you to trust me on this. Michael and I are going through some difficulties right now, and this investment was something I needed to do for my own financial security. The house is legally mine, and our rental agreement is binding." There was a long pause. "Sarah, is everything all right between you and Michael?" "Not exactly,
but that's between Michael and me to work out. Your house is safe, your living situation is secure, and you don't need to worry about any of this. After hanging up with Patricia, I knew I had perhaps an hour before Michael would come home to confront me. I used that time to set up my laptop on our dining room table, with Detective Martinez's report open to the most damaging pages. I arranged the documents chronologically, creating a visual timeline of Michael's deceptions that would be impossible for him to deny or explain away. At 11:30 a.m., I heard Michael's car in the driveway. He was home 3 hours earlier than usual, which meant he'd left work as soon as he finished talking to his mother. I took a deep breath and prepared for the confrontation that would end my marriage and reveal the true nature of the man I'd lived with for 5 years. Michael burst through the front door with the force of someone who believed he held the moral high ground. His face was flushed with anger, his jaw set with righteous indignation. "Sarah, what the hell is going on? My mother just told me you bought her house with money I've never heard of. What kind of game are you playing?" I looked at my husband, this man who had been systematically betraying me for months while maintaining the facade of a loving marriage, and felt a calm settle over me that I hadn't expected. "Sit down, Michael. We need to talk." Michael remained standing by the front door, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his chest rising and falling with barely controlled rage. The careful mask of the devoted husband had completely slipped away, replaced by something raw and ugly that I'd never seen before. "Don't tell me to sit down in my own house," he snarled. "I want answers, Sarah. I want to know how you could go behind my back and make a major financial decision without consulting me. That's my mother's house you bought, my inheritance." "Your inheritance?" I kept my voice level, almost conversational. "Interesting way to think about property that your mother is still very much alive to enjoy. But since you brought up the topic of going behind each other's backs, let's discuss that." I gestured toward the laptop screen, where Detective Martinez's report was clearly visible. Michael's eyes flicked toward the computer, and I saw a flash of uncertainty cross his features before his anger reasserted itself. "What is this supposed to be?" "It's a comprehensive financial investigation into your activities over the past year. Would you like me to summarize the highlights, or would you prefer to read through it yourself?" Michael's face went pale, but he took a step closer to the table. "You hired someone to investigate me?" "Your own husband?" "My own husband, who has been systematically stealing from me while planning to abandon our marriage for another woman." "Yes, Michael, I hired someone to investigate you, and what we found was fascinating." I turned the laptop screen toward him so he could see the bank records displayed there. "Let's start with Southwest Investment Holdings, shall we? The LLC you formed without telling me, that's been receiving over $200,000 in diverted income from your work at Morrison & Associates." Michael's jaw worked silently as he stared at the screen. I could see his mind racing, trying to formulate an explanation that would make his actions seem reasonable. "That's business income, Sarah. It has nothing to do with our personal finance. Actually, under Arizona community property law, any income you earn during our marriage belongs equally to both of us. By funneling it through a secret company and hiding it from our joint tax returns, you've been committing fraud, both against me and against the IRS." I clicked to the next page of the report, showing the multiple bank accounts Michael had opened without my knowledge. "Then there are these 8 accounts I knew nothing about. The savings account with $150,000, the checking account that shows regular payments to Stephanie Chen, the money market account that's been receiving cash deposits." At the mention of Stephanie's name, Michael's composure cracked completely. "How do you know about Stephanie?" "I know everything about Stephanie, Michael. I know you've been having an affair with her for over 6 months. I know you've been giving her $3,000 per month of our money. I know you're planning to buy a house with her in Riverside Garden. And I know you've put a $15,000 engagement ring on layaway at Cartwright Jewelers." Michael sank into one of the dining room chairs as if his legs had given out beneath him. The fight seemed to drain out of him all at once, replaced by a hollow resignation. "Sarah, I can explain." "I'm sure you can. You've become quite skilled at explaining things that aren't true, but before you start crafting another elaborate lie, let me show you something else." I clicked through several more pages of the report, displaying the forged loan applications, the credit checks Michael had run on our house, and the mortgage application he'd submitted for the Riverside Gardens property. You forged my signature on these documents, Michael. You applied for loans against our house without my knowledge. You've been planning to sell our home and use the proceeds to start a new life with your girlfriend, all while pretending to be a devoted husband. Michael buried his face in his hands. It's not what it looks like. Then what is it, Michael? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like my husband of 5 years has been systematically destroying our marriage, while stealing our money to finance his affair. When Michael finally looked up, his expression had shifted again. The anger and denial were gone, replaced by a calculating coldness that was somehow more frightening than his rage had been. You want to know what it is, Sarah? It's me finally admitting that our marriage has been a mistake from the beginning. It's me realizing that I deserve better than a life of mediocrity and compromise. The words hit me like physical blows, but I kept my expression neutral. Better than me, you mean? Stephanie understands ambition. She supports my goals instead of questioning every decision I make. She appreciates the lifestyle I can provide instead of constantly worrying about money. The lifestyle you can provide with money you stole from me. Michael's face hardened. I earned every penny of that money through my own hard work. The fact that we're married doesn't mean I have to subsidize your small-minded approach to life. I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. This wasn't the man I'd married, or perhaps it was exactly the man I'd married and I'd been too naive to see it clearly. Either way, the Michael sitting across from me was a stranger who felt entitled to steal from me while insulting my character. Small-minded approach to life, I repeated slowly. Is that what you call financial responsibility? Is that what you call honoring our wedding vow? Our wedding vows were a mistake, Sarah. We were too young, too different. I've grown and changed, and you've stayed exactly the same.
You're right, Michael. I have stayed the same. I've remained honest, loyal, and committed to our marriage. Apparently, those are character flaws in your worldview. Michael stood up abruptly and began pacing around the dining room. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're turning this into some kind of moral crusade instead of recognizing that people grow apart sometimes. It happens. People growing apart doesn't usually involve forgery, fraud, and theft. I was protecting my interests. Your interests? What about my interests, Michael? What about the 5 years I spent building a life with someone who was secretly planning to destroy it? Michael stopped pacing and fixed me with a look of pure contempt. Your interests? Sarah, you work at a mid-level marketing job making $45,000 a year. You drive a 10-year-old Honda and your idea of a splurge is dinner at Olive Garden. I've been carrying this marriage financially from the beginning. The casual cruelty of his words was breathtaking. Carrying this marriage? Michael, I've contributed equally to every major expense we've had. The down payment on this house, the car payments, the home improvements. Where do you think that money came from? It came from my success at Morrison & Associates. Everything we have is because of my career. I reached for another folder that I'd prepared and pulled out our joint tax returns for the past 5 years. Actually, let's look at the numbers. According to our tax returns, I've contributed $225,000 to our joint income over the past 5 years. You've contributed $200,000. That's hardly you carrying the marriage financially. Michael glanced at the tax returns, and I saw uncertainty flicker across his features again. Those numbers don't include the bonuses and commissions that I've been earning recently. You mean the bonuses and commissions you've been hiding from me and funneling through your secret company? I earned that money, Sarah. Just because we're married doesn't mean you're entitled to control every aspect of my financial life. Michael, I didn't even know that money existed until yesterday. I wasn't trying to control anything. I was just assuming my husband was being honest with me about our finances. Michael resumed his pacing, his agitation increasing with each circuit around the room. Honest about what? About the fact that I'm successful, about the fact that I'm finally making real money. Why should I have to apologize for being ambitious? Nobody's asking you to apologize for being successful. I'm asking you to explain why you've been lying to me, stealing from me, and planning to abandon our marriage without having the decency to tell me, because I knew you'd react exactly like this. Michael's voice rose to a shout. I knew you'd try to guilt me into staying in a marriage that makes me miserable. I knew you'd use our history together to manipulate me into giving up my chance at real happiness. Real happiness with Stephanie Chen. Yes, real happiness with Stephanie. She understands what I'm trying to build. She supports my goals instead of constantly questioning my decisions. I leaned back in my chair and studied Michael's face. What goals are those exactly? Besides stealing from your wife and committing tax fraud, I'm building a real estate empire, Sarah. Morrison and Associates is just the beginning. I have plans for my own development company, my own investment portfolio. Stephanie sees the big picture. The big picture that requires you to steal $300,000 from our marriage. Michael's face flushed red. I didn't steal anything. That money represents my contribution to our future wealth. Just because you can't see beyond your limited perspective doesn't mean I have to hold myself back. Our future wealth? Michael, you've been planning to divorce me and keep all the money for yourself. There is no our future in your calculations, because you've made it clear that you don't want the kind of future I'm offering. I stared at him in amazement. What future are you offering, Michael? A future where you lie to me constantly. A future where you steal from me while having an affair. A future where you forge my signature on legal documents. Exactly what part of that future was I supposed to be excited about? Michael stopped pacing and slammed his hand down on the dining room table. I'm offering you a future where we have real money, real status, real opportunities, but you're too small-minded to see past your middle-class mentality. Real money that you've been stealing. Real status built on fraud and deception. Real opportunities that require destroying the trust and partnership that marriage is supposed to be based on. Marriage is supposed to be about supporting your partner's dreams. I agree completely. So tell me, Michael, when exactly did you start supporting my dream? When did you ask what I wanted for our future? When did you include me in your plans for this real estate empire? Michael's mouth opened and closed without sound. Finally he managed. You never expressed interest in those kinds of opportunities, because you never told me about them. You never told me about the LLC, the hidden money, the business deals, any of it. You've been living a completely separate financial life while expecting me to be satisfied with whatever scraps of information you decided to share. I was protecting you from the stress of the business world. I laughed bitterly. Protecting me? Michael, you were protecting yourself. You were keeping me in the dark so I couldn't ask questions about where the money was going, or why you were suddenly able to afford a $15,000 engagement ring for your girlfriend. At the mention of the engagement ring again, Michael's defensive facade cracked. How did you find out about that? I told you. I hired a professional investigator. Someone who's very good at uncovering secrets that people think they've hidden cleverly. Michael slumped back into his chair, the fight seeming to drain out of him again. Sarah, I never meant for things to get this complicated. Complicated? Michael, you've been living a double life for months. You've been stealing from me, lying to me, and planning to abandon me while pretending to be a loving husband. That's not complicated. That's calculated cruelty. I didn't know how to tell you about Stefan. You didn't know how to tell me. Or you didn't want to tell me, because it would interfere with your plans to steal our house money. Michael was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I fell in love with her, Sarah. I didn't plan for it to happen, but it did, and falling in love with her required you to steal from me. I wanted to give her the life she deserved. The life she expected. I felt a cold fury building in my chest. The life she expected. Using money that belongs to both of us. Money that represents 5 years of my contributions to our marriage. She doesn't know about the money, Michael said quickly. She thinks I'm just successful at my job. So you lied to her too. How romantic. Michael's head snapped up. Don't make this about Stephanie. She's innocent in all of this. Innocent? Michael? She's been accepting $3,000 per month from a married man. She's planning to buy a house with someone who's still married to someone else. She's hardly innocent. She loves me. And I loved you too. For 5 years, I loved you completely and honestly. But apparently that wasn't enough to prevent you from stealing from me and planning to destroy our marriage. Michael stood up again, but this time his movements were slower. Defeated. What do you want from me, Sarah? You've already bought my mother's house behind my back. You've hired investigators to dig through my personal business. You've made it clear that you'll never forgive me for Stephanie. What's your endgame here? I reached for the final folder I'd prepared and placed it on the table between us. My endgame is justice, Michael, and protection for myself from any further damage you might try to cause. I opened the folder to reveal the divorce papers Rebecca Chen had prepared. These are divorce papers, requesting full disclosure of all assets, including your hidden accounts, and your LLC. They also request that you be held in contempt of court for fraudulent conversion of marital assets. Michael's face went white as he scanned the first page of the documents. You're filing for divorce? I filed yesterday morning. You'll be served officially next week. But I wanted to give you the courtesy of knowing what's coming. Sarah, we can work this out. We can go to counseling, figure out how to move forward together. I stared at him in disbelief. Move forward together. Michael, you've been planning to propose to another woman with money you stole from our marriage. You've forged my signature on legal documents. You've been systematically lying to me for months while planning to abandon our marriage. What exactly do you think counseling is going to fix? I can end things with Stephanie. I can transfer the money back to our joint accounts. I can make this right. You can end things with Stephanie because you got caught, not because you've had some kind of moral awakening. You can transfer the money back because you're facing legal consequences, not because you've suddenly developed respect for our marriage. Michael sank back into his chair, his shoulders sagging with defeat. So that's it. 5 years of marriage means nothing to you. The question was so breathtakingly hypocritical that I almost laughed. 5 years of marriage means everything to me. Michael, that's why I'm so devastated by what you've done to us. That's why I can't pretend that we can just forget about the lies, the theft, the affair, and the systematic destruction of our partnership. I made mistakes. You made choices. Deliberate, calculated choices to prioritize your own desires over our marriage, our vows, and my basic human right to honesty from my husband. Michael was quiet for several minutes, staring at the divorce papers spread across the table. Finally, he looked up at me with something that might have been genuine remorse. I'm sorry, Sarah. I know that doesn't fix anything. But I am genuinely sorry that things ended up this way. I believe you're sorry that you got caught. I believe you're sorry that your plans fell apart. But I don't believe you're sorry about the choices you made, because you've spent the last hour trying to justify them instead of taking responsibility for them. What happens now? I gestured toward the divorce paper. Now you hire a lawyer and we divide our assets, according to what's fair and legal. The house will be sold and the proceeds split equally, minus what you owe me for the money you stole. Your hidden accounts will be disclosed and divided. Your LLC will be dissolved and its assets distributed. And Stephanie is your problem to figure out. I assume she'll be disappointed to learn that the lifestyle you've been providing her was funded by theft. But that's between you and her. Michael stood up slowly, like an old man with aching joints. Can I ask you something? How long have you known about Stephanie, about the money, all of it? I started suspecting something was wrong about 2 weeks ago. I've had confirmation for about a week. And you didn't say anything? You just let me keep digging myself deeper? I considered the question seriously. I needed to understand the full scope of what you were doing before I acted. I needed to protect myself legally and financially. And honestly, I wanted to see how far you were willing to go with your deception. How far was I willing to go? Apparently all the way. Even this morning, you were still lying to me, even when I confronted you with evidence. Your first instinct was to deny and deflect. Even now you're more concerned about how this affects your plans with Stephanie than about the damage you've done to me. Michael picked up the divorce papers and flipped through them slowly. These are pretty comprehensive. My attorney is very thorough. You really thought of everything, didn't you? The investigation, the house purchase, the legal documentation. You've been planning your own strategy while I thought I was outsmarting you. I felt no satisfaction in his acknowledgement. I didn't want to outsmart you, Michael. I wanted to protect myself from you. There's a difference. Michael folded the divorce papers and slipped them into his jacket pocket. I'll need some time to process all of this. to figure out my next steps. You have 30 days to respond to the divorce filing. I'd recommend using that time to find a good attorney and to figure out how you're going to explain $300,000 in hidden income to the IRS. The IRS? Did you think I wouldn't report the tax fraud? Michael, you've been evading taxes on hundreds of thousands of dollars in income. That's a federal crime. Michael's face went pale again. Sarah, you don't understand what kind of trouble that could cause for me professionally. I understand exactly what kind of trouble it could cause. That's the point. Actions have consequences, and you've been avoiding the consequences of your actions for too long. My career could be ruined. Your career should be ruined. You've been using your position at Morrison and Associates to commit fraud. You've been stealing from your wife while planning to abandon your marriage. You've been forging signatures and evading taxes. Why should you get to keep a successful career built on criminal activity? Michael was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was hollow. I never thought it would come to this. What did you think would happen, Michael? Did you think I would never find out? Did you think I would just quietly accept whatever scraps you decided to leave me when you moved in with Stephanie? I thought you'd be angry, but I thought we could work out a reasonable settlement. I thought you'd want to avoid a messy public divorce. I laughed bitterly. A reasonable settlement? Michael, you were planning to steal our house and use the money to buy a new home with your girlfriend. What part of that sounds reasonable? I was going to make sure you were taken care of. Taken care of how? With whatever money you decided I deserved after you'd finished funding your new life. Michael didn't have an answer for that. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 5 years of marriage settling between us like a physical presence. Finally, Michael spoke again. What about my mother's house? What are you planning to do with that? Your mother is going to continue living there and paying me rent. When she's ready to move to a retirement community, we'll work out whatever arrangement makes her most comfortable. So you're going to be my mother's landlord. I'm going to be your mother's friend and financial partner, just as we discussed. Patricia understands the arrangement and is comfortable with it. She's going to hate me when she finds out what I did to you. That's probably true, but that's a consequence of your choices, not something I have any control over. Michael stood up and walked toward the front door, then turned back to face me. For what it's worth, Sarah, you deserved better than what I gave you. Yes, I did. I deserved honesty, loyalty, and respect. I deserved a partner who valued our marriage enough to honor his commitment. I deserved better than to be treated like an obstacle to your happiness. I hope you find that someday, with someone who can appreciate what they have. I hope I do too. After Michael left, I sat alone in our dining room, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal and the legal documents that would end our marriage. The house felt different already, quieter and somehow cleaner, as if Michael's deception had been a physical presence that was finally gone. I thought about the woman I'd been 2 weeks ago, watering tomatoes in the backyard, and believing that my biggest worry was whether we could afford a vacation this year. That woman had been naive in some ways, but she'd also been trusting and optimistic, and committed to building a life with someone she loved. The woman I was now was harder, more cynical but also stronger and more independent. I owned 2 houses, had a substantial inheritance still intact, and possessed detailed knowledge of my legal rights and financial options. I was no longer dependent on Michael for my security or my sense of self-worth, but I had also lost something irreplaceable, the ability to trust completely, to believe that the person sharing my bed and my life was genuinely committed to our partnership. Michael's betrayal hadn't just stolen money and time, it had stolen my faith in my own judgment, and my ability to read the people closest to me. Over the next few days, the practical details of ending a marriage began to consume my attention. Michael moved out of our house and into an extended stay hotel, claiming he needed time to think about his next steps. I suspected he was actually figuring out how to salvage his relationship with Stephanie now that his financial situation had become significantly more complicated. Jessica Walsh called to ask about our timeline for listing the house, clearly confused about why Michael was suddenly unavailable and I was asking to postpone the sale. I took great satisfaction in explaining that Michael and I were getting divorced, and that any real estate transactions would need to wait until our assets were properly divided by the court. "I'm so sorry to hear about your situation," Jessica said, though she sounded more concerned about losing her commission than about my personal circumstances. "Is there anything I can do to help facilitate the process?" "Actually, I'd like you to send me copies of all your communications with Michael about our house sale, including any documentation of his plans to purchase other properties." There was a long pause. "I'm not sure I can share confidential client communication." "Jessica, I'm also your client, and those communications are directly relevant to my divorce proceedings. I can get them through legal discovery if necessary, but it would be simpler if you just provided them voluntarily." Jessica agreed to send me the records, and they arrived the next day via email. The communications revealed even more details about Michael's plans than I'd previously known. He had been working with Jessica for over 2 months, not just to sell our house, but to coordinate the timing of the sale with his purchase of the Riverside Gardens townhouse. The emails also revealed that Michael had been pressuring Jessica to expedite the timeline, claiming that he and his fiancée were eager to move into their new home as quickly as possible. Michael had been referring to Stephanie as his fiancée while still married to me, probably while the engagement ring was still on layaway. Detective Martinez called with additional findings from his ongoing investigation. "Mrs. Mitchell, I've discovered something else you need to know about. Your husband appears to have been planning this transition for much longer than we originally thought." "What do you mean?" "I found records showing that he's been gradually moving money out of your joint accounts and into his personal accounts for over a year. Small amounts, usually less than $500 at a time, but it adds up to nearly $50,000 a year. Michael had been systematically stealing from me for a full year, not just the 6 months I'd been aware of. The betrayal went even deeper than I'd realized. There's something else. I tracked down some of Michael's former colleagues from his previous job. Apparently, this isn't the first time he's been involved in questionable financial activities." My stomach dropped. "What kind of questionable activity?" "He left his previous employer under somewhat mysterious circumstances. There were allegations that he'd been inflating his sales figures and skimming money from client accounts, but nothing was ever proven." "Why wasn't he prosecuted?" "The company apparently decided it was easier to let him resign quietly than to pursue criminal charges. They were concerned about the publicity and the potential impact on their other clients." I felt sick. Michael's betrayal of our marriage wasn't an aberration or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was part of a pattern of behavior that stretched back years, possibly to the beginning of our relationship. "Detective Martinez, is it possible that Michael has been stealing from me since we got married?" "Based on what I've found, I'd say it's very likely. The amounts were smaller in the early years, but the pattern is consistent. He's been treating your joint finances as his personal resource for your entire marriage." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Every major purchase we'd made together, every decision about our future, every conversation about our budget had been contaminated by Michael's theft. The life I thought we'd built together had been funded by my money that he'd been systematically stealing. That evening, I called my attorney to discuss the new information. Rebecca Chen listened to the details with the kind of professional calm that comes from handling difficult divorces. "This changes the scope of your case significantly," she said. "If Michael has been stealing from you for years, we're talking about a much larger amount of money than we originally calculated." "How much larger?" "Potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars when you factor in lost investment opportunities, interest, and the impact on your retirement savings. We'll need to conduct a comprehensive forensic accounting to determine the full extent of the theft." "What about criminal charge?" "Detective Martinez thinks we have enough evidence for fraud and theft charges." "I think that's very likely. The pattern of behavior you're describing, combined with the forged documents and hidden accounts, constitutes multiple felonies. I'd recommend consulting with a criminal attorney to discuss your options." Criminal charges. The thought of Michael being arrested and prosecuted for what he'd done to me was both satisfying and terrifying. Satisfying because his actions deserved serious consequences. Terrifying because it would make our divorce infinitely more complicated and public. But as I thought about the year of systematic theft, the lies, the affair, the engagement ring for another woman bought with my money, I realized that complicated in public might be exactly what Michael deserved. The next morning, I called the district attorney's office and asked to speak with someone about filing fraud charges against my husband. The prosecutor I spoke with, a woman named Amanda Torres, listened to my story with increasing interest. Miss Mitchell, what you're describing sounds like it could constitute multiple felony charges: wire fraud, identity theft, tax evasion, fraudulent conversion of assets. We'd definitely be interested in investigating this case. What would that involve? We'd need you to provide all the evidence you've gathered, including the investigator's report and the financial records. We'd also need you to be willing to testify against your husband if the case goes to trial. I'm willing to do whatever's necessary to make sure he faces consequences for what he's done. I have to warn you, prosecuting your husband criminally will make your divorce much more complicated. His criminal attorney will probably advise him not to cooperate with the asset disclosure requirements, which could drag out your civil case. I understand, but Amanda, if I don't pursue criminal charges, what's to stop Michael from doing this to someone else? What's to stop him from continuing to use his professional position to commit fraud? You're absolutely right. Men like your husband rarely stop their criminal behavior unless they're forced to face serious consequence. I scheduled a meeting with the prosecutor's office for the following week and spent the weekend preparing myself mentally for what was coming. Filing criminal charges against Michael would be the final step in destroying whatever remained of our relationship, but it would also ensure that his actions couldn't be swept under the rug or dismissed as a marital dispute. On Sunday evening, Patricia called to check on me. She'd been keeping her distance since learning about Michael's betrayal, unsure how to navigate the situation between her son and her daughter-in-law. "Sarah, dear, how are you holding up?" "I'm doing better than I expected, actually. Angry, but better. I want you to know that I'm horrified by what Michael did. I raised him to be honest and respectful, and I don't understand how he could have treated you this way." "Patricia, this isn't your fault. You raised him with good value. Michael chose to abandon those values, and that's on him, not on you. Still, I feel responsible somehow, and I want you to know that regardless of what happens with the divorce, I consider you family. You'll always be welcome in my home." The conversation with Patricia was a reminder that Michael's betrayal had damaged more relationships than just ours. His mother was heartbroken and confused, struggling to reconcile the son she'd raised with the man who had systematically stolen from his wife. But it also reminded me that I had built genuine relationships and connections that would survive the end of my marriage. Patricia, Detective Martinez, Rebecca Chen, even Jessica Walsh in her own way had shown me that there were still people I could trust, still relationships worth maintaining. As I prepared for bed that Sunday night, I thought about how much my life had changed in just 2 weeks. I'd gone from being a naive wife who trusted her husband completely to being a divorced homeowner with detailed knowledge of financial fraud and criminal law. The transformation had been painful, but it had also been empowering. I was no longer dependent on Michael for my sense of self or my financial security. I owned 2 houses, had legal representation, and possessed the knowledge and resources to protect myself from future betrayal. Michael had tried to steal my future and use it to build a new life with someone else. Instead, he had inadvertently forced me to discover my own strength and independence. The woman who would emerge from this divorce would be harder and more cynical than the woman who had entered the marriage, but she would also be stronger, wiser, and completely self-sufficient. And that woman would make sure that Michael faced every possible consequence for what he had done. The courthouse steps felt surreal beneath my feet as I walked up them on a crisp November morning, 6 months after discovering Michael's betrayal. The media attention had been more intense than I'd anticipated, with local news outlets covering what they dubbed the house theft divorce as a cautionary tale about financial infidelity. Amanda Torres met me at the courthouse entrance, her expression confident and determined. Over the past months, she'd become more than just the prosecutor handling Michael's criminal case. She'd become something like a friend, someone who understood the intersection of personal betrayal and criminal justice. "Are you ready for this, Sarah?" she asked as we walked through the security checkpoint. "I've been ready since the day I discovered what he did to me." The criminal trial had taken 4 months to reach this point. Michael's attorney had fought every piece of evidence, challenged every witness, and attempted to portray the case as a marital dispute rather than criminal fraud. But the paper trail was too extensive, the evidence too overwhelming. Detective Martinez had uncovered even more than we'd initially known. Michael's theft hadn't just been limited to our marriage. He'd been embezzling from Morrison and Associates, skimming money from client accounts, and running unauthorized side deals using company resources. The total amount of his criminal activity exceeded $800,000 across multiple victims. The courtroom was packed with reporters, legal observers, and some of Michael's other victims. Patricia sat in the front row behind the prosecution table, her face a mask of grief and disappointment. She'd testified yesterday about the family financial records Michael had asked to see, ostensibly to help with her retirement planning, but actually to calculate his potential inheritance. Michael looked smaller somehow as he sat at the defendant's table in his orange jumpsuit. The confident businessman who had once justified stealing from his wife had been replaced by someone who appeared broken and defeated. His relationship with Stephanie had ended within days of his arrest, when she learned that the money he'd been spending on her was stolen. Judge Richardson called the court to order and asked the jury foreman to stand. "Have you reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." "On the charge of wire fraud, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the charge of identity theft?" "Guilty." "On the charge of tax evasion?" "Guilty." The guilty verdicts continued through all 12 counts. Michael showed no emotion as each one was read, staring straight ahead as if he were somewhere else entirely. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder, but Michael didn't acknowledge the gesture. Judge Richardson scheduled sentencing for the following month and dismissed the jury. As Michael was led away in handcuffs, he turned to look at me one last time. There was no anger in his expression, no resentment or defiance, just emptiness, as if the man I'd once known had simply ceased to exist. Outside the courthouse, Amanda Torres addressed the media gathered on the step. "Today's verdict sends a clear message that financial fraud, regardless of the personal relationships involved, will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Mr. Mitchell's systematic theft from his wife and his employer represents a profound betrayal of trust that demanded justice." A reporter called out, "Mrs. Mitchell, how do you feel about your husband's conviction?" I stepped forward to the microphone, thinking carefully about what I wanted to say. "I feel relief that Michael will finally face consequences for his actions, but I also feel sad that someone I loved for 5 years chose to destroy so many lives for his own selfish gain. I hope this case encourages other victims of financial abuse to speak up and seek justice." The civil divorce proceedings had concluded 2 weeks earlier, with a settlement that awarded me nearly everything. The house we'd shared was sold, with the proceeds going entirely to me as compensation for Michael's theft. His hidden accounts were seized and distributed among his victims. The LLC was dissolved and its assets forfeited. Most satisfying of all, I retained ownership of Patricia's house, which meant Michael had lost not only his marriage and his freedom, but also his expected inheritance. Patricia had been devastated by her son's crimes, but she'd also been grateful that our arrangement protected her from any financial fallout. "I'm proud of you for standing up to him," she'd told me the week before. Michael's father would have been ashamed of what his son became. The financial recovery had been substantial. Between the divorce settlement, the house sale, and the forfeiture of Michael's hidden assets, I'd recovered nearly $400,000 that he'd stolen over the year. Combined with my inheritance and the equity in Patricia's house, I was more financially secure than I'd ever been, but the emotional recovery had been more complex. Trust didn't return easily after being so thoroughly betrayed. I'd started seeing a therapist who specialized in helping victims of financial abuse, learning to recognize the warning signs I'd missed, and developing strategies for protecting myself in future relationships. Financial abuse is often invisible to the victims. Dr. Williams had explained during one of our sessions. The abuser maintains the facade of a normal relationship, while systematically undermining their partner's financial security and independence. Michael's sentencing hearing was held on a gray December morning. The courtroom was less crowded this time, with only the essential parties and a few reporters present. I sat in the gallery next to Patricia, who'd insisted on attending despite her heartbreak over her son's fate.
Judge Richardson listened to impact statements from several of Michael's victims, including elderly clients from Morrison and Associates, who'd lost their retirement savings to his scheme. The elderly victims were the most heartbreaking, their voices shaking as they described how Michael's theft had forced them to choose between medical care and basic living expenses. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the podium with a written statement I'd spent weeks preparing. Your Honor, Michael Mitchell didn't just steal money from me, he stole 5 years of my life during which I believed I was building a future with someone who loved and respected me. He stole my ability to trust my own judgment about the people closest to me. He stole my sense of security in my own home. I paused, looking directly at Michael, who was staring at the table in front of him. But Michael also underestimated me. He thought I was too naive to discover his deception, too weak to fight back, too dependent on him to survive on my own. He was wrong about all of that. His betrayal forced me to discover my own strength, my own resources, and my own ability to seek justice when I'm wronged. I folded my statement and returned to my Michael's attorney made a brief plea for leniency, citing his client's cooperation with the investigation and his previously clean record, but the evidence of systematic, calculated theft spanning years made mercy unlikely. Judge Richardson delivered his sentence with the gravity befitting the scope of Michael's crimes. Mr. Mitchell, your actions represent a fundamental betrayal of trust that has devastated multiple victims, including your own wife. The court sentences you to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You will also pay full restitution to all victims, totaling $87,000. 8 years. Michael would be 42 when he was released, assuming he served his full sentence. His career in real estate was over, his professional reputation destroyed. The life he'd tried to build with Stephanie using stolen money had evaporated the moment handcuffs were placed on his wrists. After the sentencing, Patricia and I walked silently to the parking garage. She looked older than her 73 years, aged by the stress of watching her son's public disgrace and imprisonment. I keep wondering where I went wrong, she said as we reached her car, what I could have done differently to prevent this. Patricia, you didn't create the man Michael became. He made his own choices, chose his own values. You raised him with integrity and honesty. He chose to abandon those principles. I just don't understand how he could have hurt you the way he did. You were nothing but good to him. I hugged her carefully, feeling how fragile she'd become over the past months. Some people take kindness as weakness, loyalty as naivety. That says something about them, not about us. As I drove home from the courthouse, I reflected on how completely my life had changed in less than a year. The woman who'd been watering tomatoes in her backyard, worried about vacation budgets and believing in her husband's integrity, felt like someone from a different lifetime. The woman I'd become was harder, more suspicious, but also stronger and more independent. I owned 2 properties outright, had a substantial investment portfolio, and possessed hard-won knowledge about protecting myself from financial predators. More importantly, I'd proven to myself that I could survive betrayal, seek justice, and rebuild my life on my own terms. The house I now lived in was Patricia's old family home, which I'd renovated extensively over the past months. The project had been therapeutic, transforming spaces that held memories of Michael's childhood into something entirely my own. Patricia had moved to a comfortable retirement community nearby, and we maintained our friendship independent of her relationship with her imprisoned son. My work had also evolved. The publicity from Michael's case had led to speaking opportunities about financial abuse awareness. I'd testified before the state legislature about strengthening financial fraud penalties, and had consulted with law enforcement agencies about investigating domestic financial crime. Your experience gives you unique credibility, Amanda Torres had told me when she recommended me for a victim advocacy position with the district attorney's office. Survivors who become advocates are often the most effective at helping other victims. I'd accepted a part-time position with the DA's office, working with victims of financial crimes to navigate the legal system and understand their rights. The work was difficult but meaningful. helping other people avoid the isolation and confusion I'd experienced during the early stages of discovering Michael's betrayal. One of my first cases involved a woman whose husband had been forging her signature on loan documents, using their house as collateral for his gambling debts. Her story was heartbreakingly familiar, the same pattern of lies, manipulation and financial abuse disguised as marital partnership. "I feel so stupid for not seeing it sooner," she'd told me during our first meeting. "You're not stupid," I'd replied. "You trusted someone you loved." Financial abusers are skilled at maintaining the facade of a normal relationship while systematically stealing from their victim. The fault lies with them, not with you. Spring arrived with the kind of renewal that felt symbolic rather than merely seasonal. The garden at Patricia's house, now my house, was blooming with possibilities I'd planted over the winter months. The tomatoes I'd started from seed were already showing their first true leaves, a small victory that felt disproportionately significant. I'd been dating someone new for a few months, a man named David, who worked as a financial planner and understood my wariness about money and trust. Our relationship was developing slowly, built on transparency and respect rather than passion and romance. David had insisted on complete financial disclosure from the beginning, sharing his credit reports and bank statements without being asked. "I know what happened to you," he'd said during one of our early conversations. "I want you to feel completely secure about who I am and what my motivations are." The caution felt necessary rather than cynical. I'd learned that love without transparency was just another form of vulnerability, that trust had to be earned through consistent actions over time, rather than assumed based on feelings or promises. Michael's appeals had been unsuccessful, and he was serving his sentence at a federal facility in Arizona. I'd received 2 letters from him over the past year, both expressing remorse and asking for forgiveness. I'd read them carefully but hadn't responded. Forgiveness might come eventually, but it would be for my own peace of mind, not for his comfort. Patricia visited her son occasionally, maintaining the relationship despite her disappointment and heartbreak. She'd told me that prison had changed him, that he seemed genuinely remorseful about the damage he'd caused, but she'd also said that he still didn't fully understand the magnitude of his betrayal, still spoke about his crimes as mistakes rather than deliberate choices. "He asks about you sometimes," she'd mentioned during one of our monthly dinners. "Wants to know how you're doing, whether you're happy." "What do you tell him?" "I tell him that you're thriving, that you've built a life that doesn't depend on anyone else's honesty or integrity." I think that's what he needs to hear. The financial restitution payments arrived monthly, automatically deposited into an account I'd designated for charitable giving. Michael's wages from his prison job and any future earnings would be garnished until the full $447,000 was repaid, a process that would likely take decades even after his release. I donated most of the restitution money to organizations that helped victims of financial crimes, keeping only small amounts to cover the ongoing costs of therapy and legal consultations. The money felt tainted somehow, too connected to Michael's betrayal to be used for my own benefit. As summer approached, I realized that I'd successfully rebuilt my life in ways I'd never imagined possible during those dark early days of discovery and divorce. The career I'd developed helping other victims was more fulfilling than any marketing job I'd ever held. The house I owned outright was more beautiful than the one Michael and I had shared. The relationships I'd cultivated were built on honesty and mutual respect rather than convenience and tradition. Most importantly, I'd developed an unshakable confidence in my own judgment and resilience. Michael's betrayal had tested every assumption I'd held about love, marriage, and trust, but it had also revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed. The woman who emerged from the wreckage of her marriage was someone Michael had never really known, someone who refused to be a victim, and insisted on justice rather than accepting betrayal as inevitable. She was someone I was proud to have become, even though the journey had been more painful than I'd ever imagined possible. On a warm evening in June, exactly 1 year after Michael's sentencing, I sat on the back patio of my home, watching the sunset paint the desert mountains in shades of gold and crimson. David was grilling dinner while I reviewed case files for work, a comfortable domestic routine that felt both familiar and entirely different from my previous marriage. My phone buzzed with a text message from Amanda Torres. "Saw the news about your latest victim advocacy win. Proud to know you're out there fighting the good fight." The news she was referring to was a legislative victory I'd helped achieve, a new law requiring financial institutions to report suspected elder financial abuse to law enforcement. It was a small step toward preventing the kind of systematic theft Michael had perpetrated, but every small step mattered. As darkness settled over the desert, I reflected on the strange gift that Michael's betrayal had ultimately become. He'd tried to steal my future and use it to build a new life with someone else, but instead he'd forced me to discover my own power and independence. The life I'd built from the ashes of his deception was richer, more meaningful and more authentically mine than anything we'd shared together. The woman I'd become was stronger, wiser and more compassionate than the woman who'd trusted blindly in the promises of a charming sociopath. Michael had lost his freedom, his career, his mother's respect and any chance of the life he'd planned with Stephanie. He would spend the next 7 years in prison, then emerge into a world where his criminal record would follow him forever. I had gained my independence, my self-respect and a sense of purpose that went far beyond my own healing. The choice between those two outcomes seemed obvious, even though I'd never asked for the opportunity to make it. Justice had been served, not just in the courtroom but in the way our lives had ultimately unfolded. Sometimes the best revenge really was living well, building something meaningful from the ruins of betrayal, and refusing to let someone else's cruelty define your future. The stars began to appear in the clear desert sky and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete peace with my choices, my circumstances, and my future. Michael's betrayal had ended one chapter of my life, but it had also begun a better one. For that unexpected gift, I was finally ready to be grateful. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.